Hello, welcome back to Aistriú. Hope you're ready for another episode. Tá sé Alberts agamdits, mar is ganach agus ganari lat low. Best of luck with them. As I always say, don't just quickly listen to me reel them off and say, oh, well, that's probably roughly that. Let me check the breakdown. You'll get something out of that, some benefit, but nowhere near as much as if you actually pause when these sentences come up. After I talk you through one or two little caveats I want you to bear in mind with them before actually doing the translations, and then go to Fuckler Punkai, Changlin Punkai, Aber Punkai, whatever you want to use to really break down, figure these out, almost like maths equations, try and figure them out. Because again, sometimes this may feel a bit technical and stuff, and we just want to be able to speak Irish. It's just a big lot, mar shugs, big Éist, big Tishkinch. That's most people's goal. But to be able to do that, you have to have the foundations of the language, and a lot of things such as Golden Rune Lochnila, Golden Rune Sivriher, phrasing questions, the big five prepositions, and so on. So it's looking at those to get a really kind of solid base with them, so they just become inside the sub or unconscious, and then we can chat away or listen as well and understand without too many issues. Okay, so here are the 6 sentences today. A few little points on them. First few aren't too strange. They're more or less in order of difficulty from easiest to most difficult. Again, not to say the first one is easy by any means. She says a lot of things to us. She says a lot of things to us. What happened? Is he gone? What happened? Is he gone? So 2 questions inside one there. I would speak for a few more minutes with the conditional. Number 4, it's not the worst one I have seen. Number 5, do you be visiting her often? So that's with the habitual, because that's with the habitual. So again, being is going to be in there somewhere. I know the way I phrased it in English doesn't make too much sense. Kind of does in Irish English, Hiberno English, but that all comes from Irish in the first place. So being is going to be in there somewhere. And then last one, he told me another report would be made. That's with the Sivri here. You cannot have Jainta in there. Okay, so we're doing it Sivri her way. We're saying it would be made by someone, but we don't know who, as opposed to describing the state fish. Okay, so in other words, we just don't want to use Jainta in there. You're going to have to use the Sivri here in some way and do something almost that we haven't really talked about much here on the membership. But anyway, we'll get to it. Okay, so when you're ready, have a go at those. Again, pause, pen, paper, type it out, figure it out. Folklore, like physical folklore physical, but also folklore punkai, Changlin punkai, whatever you like to use. When you're ready, here are the answers. Ibrahim is going to be for she says a lot of things to us. She says a lot of things to us. Jershi Alon Ruddy Lynn. Jershi Alon Ruddy Lynn. Alternatives, you can say Jerin she. I'll explain that in a minute because I know that'll confuse people. And you can also say Niha. Okay, Niha instead of Ruddy. Niha instead of Ruddy, it's more so the Munster word for things. Some people may have used Inish, so therefore you put a present tense in Sheen, she, Alon Ruddy Dune. So again, if using Inish, now that more so means tell for this example. Okay, if you want to be very exact, it was say was the verb, but in most cases say and tell in terms of saying something to me, telling something to me. There's not much of a difference. Tell is a bit more assertive possibly in English, but if you feel like both work in English, then you can use both as well. But just be careful because Inish always has to be used with the, while aber, which is the root of say, remember it's in irregulars, the root looks very different from the actual conjugations, past, present, future. Abers, which is what we're using here, is always used with le. Okay, so we can't use dune if we're using jer, and equally we can't use lin if we're using Inish or in sheen as the conjugation is. Let's talk through it. The verb, first of all, it's funny actually, the verb say doesn't come up much in the present or the future. We're normally using it in the past, dort si, lom, dort mission shin, I then said, or she said to me. Just doesn't tend to come up that often actually in comparison then in the present and future. A lot of people get stuck in it. Again, they think they know the irregular verbs off, but some of them that don't come up as often, such as let's say bear doesn't come up in any of the tenses as often, or also present tense of say, and if you present tense of come doesn't come up too often as well. It's not really honig or it's sucky, just the way we tend to use it and phrase things, okay? So it's Jershi. A lot of people think it's Jerenshi, and that is what's used in Connacht. But in official and standard Irish, and also in the other 2 dialects, the other 2 main dialects, we will just use Jer, but in Connacht, you will say Jerin, Jerenshi normally, which is actually a more regular way, kind of makes more sense anyway, one less version of the irregular verb to notice or to remember. So therefore, if it's used in one of the 3 main dialects or it's used in standard Irish, feel free to use it yourself. Even if, let's say, you said niha, later on you're mixing and matching dialects, that's not a big issue. Okay, So it depends what you want to focus on, but don't be worrying if you're mixing stuff. Ger and she is absolutely fine. Don't let other people tell you otherwise. Okay, so ger she or ger and she, as I might say, alon ruddy, a lot of things, or niha, as they'll say in Munster, lin. So a bit better to put the lin towards the end. Again, as I said, aber le is to say to someone. So we just need to change the le to lins. That's one of our big five again. Eg, do, le, and o. And yeah, we want to put it towards the end. Otherwise, it's very like in English, she says to us a lot of things. Not as good as she says a lot of things to us. Okay? So, ger she, alon, ruddy, lin. Ever though, what happened? Is he gone? What happened? Is he gone? Maybe easier than number one. Actually, or similar difficulty depending on what you're like at phrasing questions. What happens? Cada harla. Is he gone on will she imiha? Okay, cada harla on will she imiha. So first one, we have a question word, and then the second question, we're doing it direct on the verb. When we have a question word, we just put, let's say, si, as I always call it, because it's cod or cunnis or cahan or whatever, and then a little a afterwards, and then just the verb in its statement order. You have this in, for example, tautu, you are, cunnis tautu, how are you? Okay, she goes, change she, when does she go? Cahan a hain she. So the a will force a little h onto the verb afterwards, as always. Okay, so here it's past tense, cod a harla. So let's say harla she, it happens. So just what happened, there's no one doing the action. So just cod a harla. Okay, actually don't need to put on the h because it's already there for the past tense anyway. Okay, and then the second part of it is direct on the verb. So is he gone? So in tashe, but it's one of the irregulars that we'll use the dependent forms for. So it's on will she again. If you don't kind of think about it linguistically like that, that's absolutely fine. A lot of people just will know from experience. Okay, are you on will to? So therefore, is he on will she? Gone is imiha rather is the word for gone. Okay, coming from the word imi. I don't tend to use or teach the verb imi too much because it can lead to confusion. Kind of means to go out or to leave. So in other words, I like to keep it simple. Use che for go. And then if you're talking about leaving, use fog. That covers you for everything. There won't really be any times where you have to use imi. One of the few is if you're saying gone, you have to say imiha. Okay, there's no real dulta or anything like that. There's no real verbal adjective for go. And equally, we can't use falca in this case. That'll be left. Okay, has he left? And we'll say falca. Okay, or og she did he leave. But here we're saying gone, so imiha is your main one there. Keep it simple for yourself. Split. Don't use imi really for too many things. Just use che for everything in relation to go. If you're saying go out, ag dul amach, or rachime amach, I will go out, whatever the conjugation might be. And equally fog for leave. Iver tree. I would speak for a few minutes. I would speak for a few minutes. La rohin fa cúpla nóméid ella, or fa cúpla nóméid níos mó. Níos mó is an alternative pronunciation. So la rohin fa cúpla nóméid ella or níos mó. Again, in English, a few more minutes. You want me to say a few other minutes. But in Irish, probably more natural to say fa cúpla nóméid ella. That's certainly what comes to my mind. And again, níos mó can lead to confusion in terms of bigger, as well as it doubles up, between bigger and more. So sometimes just better to keep it simple, guys. As I said there at the previous one with, let's say, fog and say, keep it simple for yourself. Of course, when listening and when reading the language, you don't control what other people say. So you need to be able to understand all these versions. But for using it yourself, you're not obliged to always be changing up and adding a huge amount of variation to the way you phrase things. You might think, oh, it's so much better than... Well, within reason, as in you don't want to always be saying alon. If you're trying to communicate a lot, it's nice to be able to say nyart or whatever else or moron. But in terms of other stuff, you're always saying the same things or saying the same words in English. So especially in the early stage, don't be worried about, I need to find 4 or 5 different ways to communicate the same thing. Rather, find one way of communicating all the different things that you need every day. One way of saying leave, one way of saying speak, one way of saying, to go back to the start again, say to versus tell, same thing. Okay, so sometimes, especially earlier on, just save your energy and kind of split your resources in terms of what you're remembering between more stuff that's useful rather than a load of different ways of memorizing one thing, okay, or of communicating one thing. So I would speak la rohin. So again, mokni the cruel, one start modification, one end. So I take the root lower. One start modification, L can take a modification, such as the ones with, let's say, R as well, can't take it. So therefore, no change there. The end is hin, but it's a long verb. I know that if I look to the future, la roime as opposed to larhime, it's also larian as opposed to lauren. So therefore, I need that little O bit in the middle. So la roime becomes la rohin, because it's first person. But I can also say la roch me, laroch me. That's used more so in Connacht, the kind of simplified version of Muchnilach. That's absolutely fine to use if you want to. Again, don't let people tell you that's incorrect just because they've learned more Munster Irish, where they'll have Fusion, or Ulster Irish as well, where they may use that in the Muchnilach, especially the hin and the fa. You can say larohin or larochach me. Both are absolutely fine, but you need to be able to understand both, and you will hear larohin more often for most speakers. Erfat, because it's for duration, and for duration of time or distance, normally for time. Erfat kuig nomid, erfat kuig blina, for 5 minutes, for 5 years, doesn't matter how short or long it is. We'll use erfat for 4 or for the duration of. For kupla nomidella, for a few more minutes. So again, kupla keeps it in singular, otherwise it would be nomage with a slender ending id at the end. So kupla nomid ella. Iver, a cahar, it's not the worst one I have seen. It's not the worst one I have seen. Ní hé an ceann is massa tá feice agam. Ní hé an ceann is massa atá feice agam. If you forgot the H, you said ní a. Don't be worried too much about that again. If you're speaking normally, most people wouldn't even hear that you've dropped the H. Okay, this is more so for written. Irish, you'd want to have that H in there. And you want to pronounce it as well. But again, if I say ní a, and you barely hear that. Ní a an ceann is massa atá feice agam. Okay, so why is it that? Well, firstly, it's not the worst one. Whatever comes after that, that's an add-on. That's part 2 of the sentence. I don't need to be worried about that. Let's look at part 1. So it's not the worst one. I straight away am using the verb to be in English, and I have a noun at the end. Therefore, it's a copula sentence. If you're not sure how that works, go up to the glossary, look at any videos we've done on is, tá, and the copula in general. So what order do I apply to the copula? Again, go up to the glossary if you're not sure about the 4 different categories, let's call them, or different types of copula sentence you can have. This is category number 3, as I would have put it. So when we're not naming at start, we're just saying it is, or they are, or we are, or whatever, and then saying the whatever. It is the man, or he is the man rather, it is the match, she is the girl, and so on. So it's not the worst one. Again, worst as an adjective can try and throw us off there. I could say it's not the worst summer ever, or it could all these different words, but ultimately that's all just masquerading, really. They're hiding what we're really looking for, which is the noun, which is the worst one, the one even, and then worst is going to go after as an adjective. Therefore, if I start off with whatever is a and ceann, for it is the one, change that to negative. I do that by just changing the is to a ni. So ni a, vowels are clashing, so I'm going to put an H there, ni hey. You just learn that over time, ni hey, as a little phrase even. So ni hey and ceann, worst is massa. Ni hey and ceann is massa. Again, that's the same as isay on far, for he is the man, or isay on far a. If you had a second ifada in there, that's fine as well. That's optional depending on how much you want to emphasize it and whether you're trying to split it from something else later on the sentence. Not too important for this one, and often not too important most of the time where we have these sentences. So ni hey an ceann is massa. That I've seen atá feice agam. Atá feice agam. Okay, so that is seen at me. If I was trying to say that I saw, I'd say a hunnic me, or a ekin me, present tense, that I see, that I have seen. Again, I've seen the game. Tá an cluiche feice agam. That structure, again, head up to the glossary. Look at the perfect tense video. That one's also for free on YouTube. I believe released that back last November, December, if you're not sure about that. So that is seen at me. Atá feice agam. The dog that I had on Monster of Iagam, similar thing, the dog that was at me, the worst thing that is seen at me. Iverkuig, do you be visiting her often? Do you be visiting her often? With the habitual. So in statement form, it would been to ag torts kortsa, or he geminic, been to ag torts kortsa, or he geminic. So therefore, the question, just put the on in front, and that forces an arrow on mean to ag torts kortsa, or he, geminic. So what have we got going on here? Again, with the bean, it's always going to be that structure. If it's habitual, something that happens every year. Bean to the dul go Canada, gach saura, they go, as we'd say in English, standard English, to Canada every summer. They do be going to Canada every summer. Okay, so that's what it is here. Add the on to make it into a question, that forces the arrow, so on mean. And that can be tough then to understand. Same thing, often I'll say to my students, they'll know the verb to be really well. And they'll know by me for I will be, but then I'll say on my to, and they'll think I'm talking about like, kind the Ulster pronunciation of ma on my lat, for example. Okay, so again, no one after the on for questions, you're going to have an arrow afterwards on gyapan to with the G. On gyapan to with the G. Okay, so therefore here we've got on mean, And then that rolls in to the continuous. Ag tuairt cóirte. Remember, for visit, there is no verb for visit in the language. What are we actually trying to say? Thinking always on Learn Irish Line about the weird kind of translations in English. So it's giving a visit. Ag tuairt. If you said ag tuairt cóirt, don't worry. Technically, you should have the genitive after the continuous. Not a massive deal. And again, the 2012 revision to An Cait An Ufgul, the standard of Irish that was redone or kind of revised, let's say in 2012, took away a lot of the importance or the necessity to always have the genitive after the continuous. But if you can get used to it, it does sound a bit better and it will satisfy more people here. Listen, like some people think it is very much still has to be put in. So towards cóirte, just add the E to have genitive. Again, if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I find out what actually is the genitive of a noun? Go to folklore.ie, find that noun, click into the fem or the mask written beside, standing for feminine or masculine, written beside the word. That'll show you then a list of what it is before, after definite article, after definite article with genitive in the plural, so how it's say visits and so on. So mean to towards cóirte. On her, again, thinking of the strange translation in English, giving a visit on her. So on her, again, one of our big five. So on her urhi or urha, as I can also pronounce it. And then often Dominic. And that brings us to the last one. Iver Shay. He told me another report would be made. He told me another report would be made. So it's going to be Jinna sé dum go ndéanfaí tuairisc eile. Jinna sé dum go ndéanfaí tuairisc eile. So this is a tricky one. Something I'm not sure. Maybe in Léirish once or twice on the membership. We've covered that, of course, being the FAI father, which we're going to go into in a minute, looking at the Mochanílach Siri here. Okay, but firstly, let's get the first bit out the way. He told me, so here dealing more so with tell rather than say. Again, if said dort say lum, not a big deal. But for here, if you want to be exact, for tell, jinna sé dum. So using the du with inish. Think of, you might have heard me or different people say inish dum before as a little, tell me, let me know, whatever. So if you remember inish with du and then flips for the other one, aber with le. Perfect, that's all good. Jinna sé dum. So then, we talked a lot on the membership about the Siri here, the passive. Uter for our goals and rules. So again, past passive. I'm looking at the wrong bit of the camera here. Too many cameras going on. Uter for, so past passive, present passive, future passive. We also have Mochanílach passive. Okay, so with the verb to do, it was made. Let's say if we did the made version, which it is here anyway, would be made. So it was made, renew. It is made, dainter a. It will be made, dain for a. But then what about it would be made? That's the fourth possible one. And how are we going to do that? Well, what we do is we just add an FI father or an FAI father. But we have to add it to the kind of Mochanílach root of it. So that's why it has the H in there as well. So if I was just saying it would be made, it would be Yainfi A. Yainfi A. It would be made. But then the G forces an aru. So that it would be made. He told me another report. Again, we don't have the that sometimes in English, but we know it's there in Irish. He told me another report would be made, or that another report would be made. So go forces an arrow, and like a game of rock, paper, scissors, the arrow always beats the shevu. Okay, so veach she, he would beat go meach she, that he would be. You see this in the Mochanílach a lot of the time, because the Mochanílach is a H built into it, but then after the go, or after an on again, like we spoke about earlier, as the question help word, that's going to force an arrow, so therefore it's going to yainfi here. Okay, quite advanced, quite tricky. If that's still a bit tough, don't worry too much. Again, folklore.ie, clicking into the verb instead of the mask or fem, because obviously verbs can't be masculine or feminine, still have little ver or verb written beside it. Click into that, drop down menu, you'll have past, present, future, and the Mochanílach, and so on. And at the bottom of every one, it'll give you what the verb is in the passive in that tense, because the C over here technically is in a tense by itself. Okay, so Jinna sé dum go ndéanfaí tuairisc eile. That's another report would be made. Tuairisc, the best word for report. I appreciate it depends what type of report you're talking about, but 95% of the time it will be tuairisc. Okay, and that is it, guys, for this week. A lot in there, and I went through it relatively fast, and just trying to keep these videos somewhat brief instead of going on 25-30 minutes giving you information might have already covered. And as I say, now that we have the glossary here and then can reference that instead of spending 10 minutes there talking about the Mochanílach golden rule or the Siri here golden rule, I can briefly go over it and again point at there for more information should you look for it. So hopefully that makes sense. Plenty more to come on Aistriú in the future, as well as loads more stuff here on LIO at patreon.com/learn Irish online and here on the Patreon app as well. Any questions, any issues with anything I've gone through there, just leave a comment down below. I'll get back to you in the next day or two. As always, míle buchas as a bheith takeúlinn ansa ar Patreon. Lura me leat go luath in ag Aistriú nó seo eile ansa ar an Málaíocht Domlán, slán agus beannacht.